Bismillahirrahmanirrahim and Assalamu alaikum. Today I am giving the lecture on the topic of reflex action. Learning objectives. At the end of a lecture, a student should be able to define reflex action, state the components of reflex art, distinguish between sensory and motor components of reflex action, classify reflexes based on the time of appearance, physiology and clinical practice, describe the properties of reflex action. Definition. A reflex may be defined as an immediate or involuntary response to a stimulus. A reflex is a fast response to a change in the body's internal or external environment in an attempt to restore homeostasis. Reflex action is defined as any sign as any response that occurs involuntarily or automatically without conscious effort. It is the mode of action of nervous system. There are two types of reflexes: simple or basic reflexes, which are built-in unlearned response such as pulling the hand away from a burning hot object; acquired or unconditioned reflexes, which are as a result of practice or learning such as driving a car or typing. Stimulus exist in many energy forms, modalities, for example, light, sound, pressure, taste, and chemical changes. Receptors are highly sensitive to one particular stimuli modality. Each receptor is specialized to respond to one type of stimulus, which is its adequate stimulus. For example, receptors in retina of eye are sensitive to light rays, in ear to sound waves, and heat receptors in skin to hot and cold temperature. Receptors convert stimulus energy into receptor potential, which in turn converted to action potential. Reflexes and diagnosis. Evaluation of a reflex can aid a doctor in diagnosing a problem. A reflex which stops functioning or functions abnormally may indicate that a particular central or peripheral conduction pathway in the body has been damaged. The reflex action. The nerve pathway involved in a reflex action, including at its simplest a sensory nerve and a motor nerve with a synapse in between. Reflex art. The neural pathway involved in a complex reflex activity is known as a reflex art, which include 5 basic components. Sensory receptors sense the change in the environment or stimulus. Efferent sensory pathway integrating center, spinal cord or brain. Efferent motor pathway effector organ obeys the command and perform the action. Sensory and motor components of a reflex. Reflex art consists of an afferent or sensory part and an efferent or motor part. Afferent part include stimulus, receptor, and sensory neuron. Stimulus, it is a detectable physical or chemical change in the environment of the receptor: touch, pain, light, and sound in response to a stimulus. The sensory receptor produces a receptor potential, which in turn triggers an action potential or signal. A signal is relayed by the afferent pathway to the integrating system, which may be the spinal cord or brain, for processing and coordination. This is the diagrammatic presentation how stimulus is being received by the receptor, which is processed to the sensory neuron. Then it is being processed to the relay neuron or interneuron. Then further information is sent to the motor neuron, which further sends the information to the effector organ, and then the response is being initiated. Motor component of a reflex. Motor component include integrating center, efferent or motor neuron, efferent pathway to the effector organ. The spinal cord and the brain system integrate basic reflexes, whereas the higher centers usually process acquired reflexes. The integrating center makes a decision about appropriate response and sends a command via efferent pathway to the effector organ that carries out the desired response. The effector organ that obeys a command is skeletal muscle in somatic nervous system, cardiac or smooth muscle, or a gland in the autonomic nervous system. Example of a reflex action. Stimulus: heat from a flame. Receptor present on the skin sense hot temperature and produce receptor potential that is converted into action potentials or signals. Sensory nerve fiber carries the signals enter the spinal cord through the dorsal root. Signals ascend up the lower brain, finally reaches the sensory cortex, which receives signals, process them, and give commands. Command is sent via motor neuron to the muscles of the hand to perform action, that is, to remove itself from the hot source. Classification of reflex. Physiological, it is being classified on the basis of physiological, clinical, and time of appearance. Monosynaptic, superficial, inborn, or conditioned. Disynaptic is deep. Polysynaptic is visceral, acquired, or conditioned, and it might be the pathological type. Physiological classification depends on the number of synapses involved in a reflex are monosynaptic, involving only one synapse between the sensory and motor neuron, thus very rapid response is stretch reflex. Disynaptic, involving two synapses, for example Golgi tendon organ reflex. Polysynaptic, more than two synapses involved in the reflex are, that is the withdrawal reflex. Clinical classification. This classification is used by the clinician depending upon the location of receptors. Superficial receptors located in the skin or mucous membranes such as touch, pain, pressure receptors. Example of reflex include corneal, conjunctival, abdominal or plantar reflex. Deep receptors. Deep receptors are located in the deep structures such as the muscle spindle and Golgi tendon organ in the muscles and tendons. Example of the reflex are the stretch reflex and tendon reflex. Visceral. Receptors located in the wall of the viscera such as the baroreceptors, pressure receptors, chemoreceptors, glucoreceptors. It includes deglutition reflex and micturition reflex. Pathological. It is not present in the normal response but in pathological condition. They are in conditions with Babinski's signs and clonus. Difference between the unconditioned and conditioned reflexes. Unconditioned reflexes are the inborn reflexes present since birth. They are fixed in number. Spinal cord is required. They always persist in life. And examples are the withdrawal reflex, knee jerk, deglutition, and cuff reflex. Whereas in case of conditioned reflex acquired later in life by the practice, number can increase or decrease. Cerebral cortex is acquired for conditioning, may be lost with time. For example, driving a car, typing, or playing a piano. Thank you. That was all about the reflex action.